your driving instructor would say things like, how far back from the car in front should you be? Tires and tarmac. Once that's stuck in your head, I'll put money in the fact it's there for the rest of your life.
Welcome everyone to Adventures in Networking. Just as I spotted something that might not be working. Hope this is working for you. You wouldn't be watching it if that wasn't the case, was it? So welcome to Adventures in Networking. Hi Kelly, how are you? Back from the United States of America.
I am. I'd say relaxed. Yeah, rested. Maybe not relaxed with the amount of stuff that we did. But yeah, had a lovely time. Thank you.
Yeah, not sure relaxed is the right word, because I've seen the itinerary and the footsteps. But so this month we are going to be talking about, we've got a good topic, how to unboring your message. We are very aware that in the business world, so, like a lot of the time, we talk about online, we talk about social media posts, we talk about networking introductions, what you say at networking. And let's face it, a lot of business content, a little bit boring. Not boring, well, possibly dry, functional. We want to communicate, but we don't want to bore people, but we see a lot of content that is boring. So we thought, let's get someone along who, I don't think he could be boring, even if he tried, actually.
If we're leaving in the waiting room, maybe he could be boring.
He's gesticulating to us there from the waiting room. So we'll bring him on in a moment. So it's presentation coach Simon Raybould. So he's going to talk about putting the emotion and stories into your messaging. There's a little bit of a spoiler. And how to engage people online, because it is a skill unto itself. So should we stop rambling, Kelly?
We could bring him in, couldn't we? I was just going to say, the story is a big part of our journey. And I do believe that it's one of those things people will either love that or hate it. And I think as time moves on, more people want to hear this story. But Simon will go obviously into this in more detail. But us as a business and a family-run business, our story is massively entrenched into our business journey, isn't it?
Hold that thought, because I think ours is a good example of the difference between putting a story in kind of disingenuously because you're trying to curry favor and make it look good, like there's a meaning behind my pursuit of money. Because when you tell our story and then actually work out what that means in relation to the business, it's real. I was talking about this to someone this morning. So, but yeah, hold that thought. Let's bring Simon in.
Let's bring him in.
There he is.
Well, hello again. How are you doing?
Good.
Very good.
So nothing's changed in the 5 minutes I've been in the green room then. Excellent.
No, not so much.
And to James, that point about sort of people making stories and trying to be interesting for the sake of it, rather than it being embedded in what they do. I have literally just drawn something which is a Mickey take of those LinkedIn posts where I go, I fell over on the ice today. Here are 4 things I learned about the colour of cardboard boxes. As we've all seen that kind of thing, where somebody tells a story for the sake of trying to attract audience's attention, and then they waffle off on something that's completely hat stand.
You can see it, can't you? They've been taught the formula. This is how you construct an eye-catching story. And of course, the problem is, are you fundamentally missing? Is it of any relevance, and is it actually interesting to start with? So
yeah, absolutely. And it's to get really technical really quickly, we call that the affective model of delivery, which is affective as an emotional. You give the emotional story hook, and then you try and crowbar in something useful on the back of it, and it works for getting attention, and then it hacks people off because they realize that you were just trying to get their attention. It is the story version of clickbait.
Good point.
Does everybody's head in. You get a headline that says click here for, and you click there and it's for something else. It's click here to download your free such and such, and then when you get there it's $35. It's the story version of that, and it does everybody's head in, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or at least it does mine in, because I'm short-tempered and intolerant.
We'll maybe come back to that in a minute, because I feel like we've got very deep into that conversation very quickly. But I do think that is an important message for people, because I think it's the desperation of trying to get some interest into my content that I'm giving a little bit of myself, but I don't want to give too much because I don't just want that focus to be on that thing. I need to attach that to something more meaningful in my business. And just remembering you said I gesticulated a lot in the green room, and I'm literally, that's all you can see. So I'm going to sit on my hands. But it's that desperation to try and connect it back so badly that makes it go so wrong.
That point, a professional will differentiate between what is interesting and what is of interest.
Yes.
And they will push the interesting stuff, which is the equivalent of tabloid newspapers pushing stuff out which is interesting. So and so said such and such to so and so is sleeping with so and yada yada. But is it really of interest? Is it really of national importance? Is it really going to change the world? And there's a better way of doing things, which is to give people stuff which is of interest, and they can make it interesting, rather than give them interesting stuff and pray that you can hook something useful on the back. Is that making sense? I don't know if I explained that properly, but it's very early in the live stream to get so philosophical. But interesting is not the same as interest. If that makes sense.
Well, especially I suppose because in your tabloid example, just for the sort of thrill factor, sort of titillation of the, it doesn't need to have a deep meaning, does it? It's done its job. The hook in itself is the point, isn't it? So what you're saying is what we try and do in our desperation, kind of continuing from what Kelly's saying. Really, what I want to do is market my, insert name of business here. So what I'm going to do is just craft this thing that gets your attention, and then buy my thing. So
the newspaper equivalent of that, James, picking up on your background, because I vaguely remember you were a print journalist at one point. So kind of, and if you look at the costs in old-fashioned newspapers of where people put their adverts, it cost a lot more to put your advert on page 4 than anywhere else in the newspaper, because of the literal titillation of page 3. The logic being that people went to page 3 and they saw the stories, the adverts on page 4. Turns out when you do the analysis of that was a complete waste of time, because nobody looked at page 4 because they were also hooked up on, mindlessly, misogynistically, stupidly, on page 3, if that makes sense. That does not make me look like a good person if I've read the research on that kind of thing, does it? But reading the research about it is different from actually buying the newspapers. But it's the same sort of thing. You give people the titillation and then they ignore the story, whereas I'm all about giving people the story in an interesting way.
I love that. That page 3 thing, that's an interesting conversation with a younger person who's grown up in a world where that doesn't exist. You try to explain to a young person, we used to buy a daily newspaper. That's where you got the information about what was going on in the world. And there was a picture on page 3 of a woman with no top on. And do you know what's ridiculous about it? It didn't end that long ago. I think it's something crazy like 2010 or something like that. And it just seems so anachronistic now.
Quite rightly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that was a good thing to do. I'm just pointing out that what we know about human nature now proves that it didn't work to pay for adverts on page 4 because of page 3. I can just imagine all the hate mail going in. How dare you justify page 3? No, that's not what I'm doing.
It's a brilliant example of, I just want to get eyeballs on what I'm doing by hook or crook. But what you're saying is don't bother. Because no one's going to execute on your call to action based on a false premise of come and look at this thing. So what should we do for, if we take the framing of the fact that we know we need to communicate business information about what we do, what we offer, who's it for, which is fine. How do we go about that, presenting that in a way that doesn't just seem really boring and like we're reading a marketing pamphlet?
So there's a difference between long form and short form. If you've got time, the way you do it is give people the useful information, the thing they need to learn, and then illustrate it with emotional stories that back it up. So they go, oh yeah, I get that. Here is how to do X. For example, here is person who did X and got results Y. And the person should look like the person who is reading it or hearing the story and that kind of thing. And if you've got anything more than, let's say, a couple of hundred words or a 45-second presentation, that's absolutely the way you should do it. The research is very clear about that. If you look at how TEDx's work and all of that kind of jazz, the ones that are the most successful are the ones where they give the information and then give the illustrative, emotional content afterwards, which always takes people by surprise because they kind of think of TEDs and TEDx's as the storytelling center of the world, but they're not. They're much more sophisticated and clever than that. If you are talking about short form content, you've got two options. There is the give people what they want, just that little nugget of how to be useful, and then twist it in some way to give them a humorous little background thing or a joke or something like that, so that there is an emotional connection with it. So if you give people just the dry stuff, they don't take it in. 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4, and then 3-word sentence that makes it funny, then it absolutely sticks. And if you can't do that, and it's such short form content that you can't go anywhere, I think you've got, 15, 20 seconds or stuff. The only thing you can do at that point is give people a hint of what you're trying to teach them rather than the real thing. So you give them the would you like to, or, when you're doing so-and-so and it all goes horribly wrong and people go, oh, yeah, that happened to me.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, so how do I stop that happening? Whereas what you get at, I don't know, let's take your stereotypical networking meeting. Somebody comes along and goes, you do the 30-second round robin thing. And people go, hello, I'm an accountant. And they can see everybody's minds just go. And then they desperately try and make themselves more interesting and go, I'm an accountant, but we're not like other accountants. And then they try and make themselves more interesting. We do all our accountancy naked or something to try and make themselves memorable. I don't know. Just for the record, I'm making this up. I'm not actually.
You're not, yeah.
My accountant lives down the road. I'm not actually talking about my accountant.
We hope, yeah.
No. Well, I don't know. Maybe she does do things like that. I don't know. But my point is, a better approach would be, instead of going, I'm an accountant, I do things naked, would be to get people interested in the issue in the first place. So, Kelly, James, do you really, really, really like doing your VAT returns? No. So an accountant goes, right, that hateful feeling you've got when you've got your tax returns and the deadline's closing in, and if you get it wrong, HMRC will be down on you like a ton of bricks. And that gets the emotional hook. And then the accountant says, well, I make all of that go away. Then you've got the emotional buy-in, and you follow it up with the data, which goes, and here's a follow-up. I promise you, if you employ me, I will save you in tax more money than I cost.
Yeah.
And
when you talk about it like
to employ that accountant.
Yes, you talk about it like that and it seems so simple. And I know people watching this will think, oh, but how can I do that? It's not as easy for me. James, you talk about this. You essentially, you do one of three things in your business. You either save people time, save people money, or you do a combination of the three. And that's what we want to hear.
You missed make.
Sorry. Save time, save money, make money, or a combination of those three. Yeah. That's as our emotional core. That's what we want to hear, don't we? I don't need to hear all of that other fluffy stuff around there yet. I'll find that out later, and then I'll decide whether actually you're the right person to help me do that. But ultimately, I need to know what you're plugging in to my emotional core in order to help me with one of those things.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
That's exactly what you're saying.
That's it. It's quite simple at its core. It's worth pointing out that simple, as you imply, Kelly, simple does not mean easy.
No.
Losing weight is simple. Eat less, move more. But as anybody who's tried to lose weight will tell you, it is not that easy. It takes a bit of practice, and it takes some. You try it and you go, "Did that work?" Yeah, no, it didn't. I'll try something.
Functionally, I think it's worth just reiterating this point. So, what we're saying is, most people, and this is networking, but I think this also equally applies to social media messaging. People want to tell you what they do. This is the mechanic, and you hear this at networking. I offer range of services. Now, if you're an accountant, you don't particularly need to tell me that you can do tax returns and there's a bookkeeping service, and because I think we all take that as a kind of implicit fact, isn't it? Why would you be an accountant if you didn't do that? But people do have a fixation of listing what they do and even how they do it. So the delivery mechanism. But what you're saying is get to the bit. I mean, this is what in marketing terms you call social proof, isn't it? Either give me the example of what you've done and how I can then relate to it, or give me the opinion and the voice of how it made someone feel who experienced that in action. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, stop talking about what you do and even how you do it, and tell us why it matters to the person to whom you are speaking.
That's it.
So there's a really silly example, which I use quite a lot. It backfired once at a tech conference, but I stood on stage and went, nobody, because all these tech people were saying, my app does this and here's how it works and all of that kind of jazz. And the investors were just going, no money was coming. So we got to them and I said, nobody cares how your app works. They care what the hell your app does. And the example I always give is stick your hand up if you've used an Excel-like spreadsheet at some point. Everybody puts their hand up. Keep your hand up if you have used Excel to sort a column of data. Everybody puts their hand up. Keep your hand up if you know how Excel actually sorts the data. Nobody knows. Put your hand up. Yeah, exactly. Put your hand back up if you care. Nobody puts their hands back up. What we care about is this little magic black box, random data in, sorted data out the far end. It could be pixies in that little black box as far as we're concerned. We don't care. It backfired on one occasion, as I say, at a tech conference, because they all went, yeah, I know how it works. It's because they're all nerds.
And they cared about it too.
And they cared about it. But the point is that they were not getting any investment because they were telling people how their software works and what their software did, rather than why the person in the audience should care about why it did what it did. It's called, the jargon phrase for it is, it's the curse of the expert.
I love that. And I think you've touched on something really important there. We know our industries so well. We know our area of expertise so well. We assume everybody else does. So we use that terminology. We want to blind people with science. We want to make ourselves look clever because we know it. When quite often people don't need that. We need to be talking to people at such a low level that it speaks to their emotions. Not a low level, like that sounds degrading, but to such a small degree that you give them enough information that they understand what you're saying, plug into what it is you're saying because it's spoken to them emotionally, and then they want to talk to you more. You don't have to do it all in that introduction.
Yep.
Your job in the introduction is to be a good person, to get across well, and to instigate another conversation.
Yep. So all that stuff about how you do what you do, by all means have that ready, but don't start power hosing at people unless and until they ask for it.
Yeah.
Because that's the point where they're doing due diligence. If they're asking, and how does this work? You know they are already emotionally hooked into it, because they wouldn't be checking out the validity of it unless they were thinking about buying it.
Yeah.
Whereas what the rest of us do, just, Corinne, my wife, is a reasonably good amateur photographer. If you ask her about a photograph, she'll tell you what camera she used, what lens she used, what f setting she used, yada 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 yada. Actually, what I care about is the fact that there's a wild tiger in the photograph. More importantly, actually, there was a wild tiger in the photograph and I didn't know it was there. And I got out of the Jeep and was walking into the bush to go and have a wee towards the wild tiger.
Wow.
What's she doing behind the camera? Smirking to herself.
Well, worse, she didn't tell me to get back in the Jeep because the wild tiger until after she had taken the photograph.
You've been with her a long time now, though, Simon.
Yes. Because, I quote, I didn't want to frighten the tiger by shouting out to you. What?
What a line.
Or startle the tiger, sorry, startle the tiger. Thanks for
That's
that.
even worse. Like, she's just trying to be polite to the tiger. Not, it might have attacked you because I shouted. It's like, I didn't want to ruin its day.
Didn't want to do it. It's 8 foot tall and 9 foot long or something, and she was frightened about going, Simon, get back in the Jeep. Oh, it might upset the tiger.
Good story, though, to use.
Oh, yeah, but and it's
Go
95%
on.
true, which is even better. But the point is that if you ask her about the photograph, she talks about the process of taking the photograph, not the photograph itself.
But this is the point, isn't it? And I'm going to sit somewhere in between what you've both said. So your point about the Excel spreadsheet, a certain audience knew it didn't go down because they had too much knowledge. Kelly's example, and you're right, Kelly, about in most instances, Helen Beckenham said this about when you're writing website copy. The thing that you think is too obvious to put on your website is the thing that should be at the top, because it's probably the reason they went to your website in the first place.
Yeah.
As a kind of entry level point. But there is a point there, isn't there, between, like, I see a lot of people at networking that don't really know their audience. They just think there's this kind of amorphous idea of a customer that's got money. Kelly, I think back to when we were selling websites and we knew what pressed people's buttons. They were frustrated because they had to go to a designer to change a page or a color or a box. They were being charged for SEO services that they didn't really understand, and they were just getting a bill each month, and it was all psychobabble. So we just went in and said, we'll show you how to edit your website. You'll never have to speak to us again to make basic changes. We'll show you the analytics so you know what it's doing. You don't have to pay for SEO services. And that was purely based on, we knew what the audience needed to hear. You have to know that, don't you, Simon?
Yeah, and the acronym that I use all the time for trying to figure out which stories to tell your audience under those circumstances is SOAP. You can tell them stories about yourself. We do this. Whoops, I've just seen the hand gesticulation thing going up there.
Good.
Self, we do this. And what that does is give you credibility, but it alienates your audience because you're talking. You can talk about others. That's the O. I've done this for so-and-so. Google does it like this. Apple does it like this. Amazon does it like that. So there's your social proof. Or you can tell stories about people who are like the people in your audience. And that's where you're talking about there. It's kind of a so-and-so over there was frustrated about the fact that he had to pay for his SEO and he had to pay 30 quid to change the color of his font and all of that kind of and people engage with that kind of stuff. But even better than that, if you can, is the P of SOAP, SOAP, stands for planted stories. It's getting people to figure out the story for themselves in their own head, because those are the stories they trust the most. Because, well, you can't lie to yourself. I mean, and people do lie to themselves all the time, I know, but they believe their lies that they tell themselves, if you see what I mean. So if you can get your audience member or whoever you're talking to online to tell themselves a story about how good their website would be if they bought from you, you're absolutely landing, because you don't have to do any conversion at that point. They are going, right, I want to buy from you because insert your own stuff, in your own motivation here. And you can do that more often than not with a simple graphic or a question or a story that relates to the people that they are like and all that kind of jazz. So the most famous example I can think of off the top of my head is Hemingway. You know his famous 6-word short story? For sale, baby shoes, never worn. No, that's not a story. That's an advert. But people make up the story in their heads about why somebody is selling baby shoes that have never been worn. And if you can do that in that kind of thing in your social interactions online, in your presentations, in your marketing, so that people make up their own stories, you're absolutely laughing. The only problem you've got then is not letting them down, because they might make up stories about what you can deliver that you can't. But that's part of the sales process, to filter them out, to go, actually, do you know what? It'd be lovely if I could do that, but it's not physically possible and it's illegal in 14 states. So your point is that you filter those people out, but they are crowding to come to you.
That sounds like it's very hard to do.
Well, Hemingway pulled it off in 6 words.
But it was Hemingway.
Trump is pulling it off in 4 words. Make America great again. He's not telling people what America should look like or used to look like or what great looks like or when America was great. He's just saying, let's make America great again. And people are, for good or ill,
filling their own gaps.
They're filling in their own gaps based upon their own needs, prejudices, circumstances, education, and all of that kind of jazz.
And also probably not actually digging deep enough to find out what that actually means from him, because they're so content on that message within their own selves, they're just going with it.
Right. Now, there's a moral question about whether he as a politician should go further and explain what it means, what his policies are. That's a separate issue. Yeah. But from a marketing perspective, it's a mantra of genius. People, his version of buying stuff from me is voting for him.
Wow, that is great, because my version of that will be different to yours, to James, to the next person. But our collective is we want it to be great.
Yeah. So
that's what
your Native Americans version of when America was great is going to be different from your Wall Street bankers version of when America was great. I'm not making any political observation about who is right or wrong, although I do have a strong opinion about it. But my point is that he's doing it in just 4 words.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Barack Obama did it in 3.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
Or yes, we can.
Of course. Yeah.
Yes, we can do what? He never said what. Well, he did. He went into the policies later on, but he hooked people in with this planted story, this implied story of yes, we can. Now, I can't give you examples of doing that in marketing and all of that kind of jazz, because it depends on the relationship between the vendor and the market. It's very, very context specific.
Well, there's an obvious one, isn't there, that everyone would have heard, Just Do It by Nike. That was brilliant for that same sort of reason, because the it is what you but the intention is, don't matter what you're doing, just get on and do it. So whatever your version, whether that's just standing up and walking across the other side of the room or running a marathon, that's the thing that's going to put you in this brand and in this world, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. And they were very clever in how they visually backed it up as well, because they didn't just show people running ultramarathons through the desert.
Yeah. There's a new one that they've done.
Slogging down the street at 2 miles an hour.
Yeah.
There's a new advert that they've done that's about something. It is people slogging it, running in the rain and getting up early in the morning. And it's something like winning isn't comfortable. I'll have to look it up. If anyone watching knows what that is, but it's very clever. It's a similar sort of thing, isn't it?
But isn't the best messaging simple? I think that's what we're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting add-on to that about how big should the story be that you're telling people? How big should the thing that you're selling them? Because if you sell them stuff that is so big, they just look at it and go, yeah, I can't do that. That's not for me.
Yeah.
We talk
so
about
on that note, can I ask you about editing? Because it's one of the questions that I wrote down. I think there's a tendency now, particularly online. Let's talk about networking. I want to get my point across. I'm just going to keep talking. I'm going to keep saying I'm not getting a response, so I'm going to keep talking. So the power of the edit, because everything to us as business owners is important. How have you got any tips on discerning what's important for the audience, not for you?
There's a couple of trite answers I can give at this point. My favorite is, imagine you are trying to explain what you do to a smart 6-year-old. Because at that point, they don't need to know how you do anything, and they've got the concentration span of an ant on amphetamines, frankly. So if you can get... I've never seen an ant on amphetamines. I wouldn't know. So if you can get it across to practice it, refine it, strip it down until it would work for a smart 6-year-old or 12-year-old if you've got one. Obviously, get their permission to bore the pants off them first and make sure it's a child who wants to be there. But is that making sense? Kind of strip it down till you've got right down to the absolute basics. And the only way to do that is to start off with the waffly version and edit and edit and edit and edit and edit. There are people who can come up with the really pithy things straight away. And there's a reason you have to pay them huge amounts of money. And you go, why have I paid you £25,000 for 30 minutes work? Well, You've paid them actually for 30 years of experience and a moment of genius rather than so there's one tool there. The other dirty tricks and tactics you can look for are to look for rhymes and alliteration and pattern, because those things will stick in people's heads. So cast your mind back, for example, to when you were learning to drive, and your driving instructor would say things like, how far back from the car in front should you be? Tires and tarmac. Once that's stuck in your head, I'll put money in the fact it's there for the rest of your life. You might not obey it, but we know that's how far back we should be. And if you can't see to come out of a road, how do you peep and creep? Because the 2 foot, just you don't leap out, because those ways, those alliterations and those rhymes are ways of getting to people to stick in their heads. Does that answer the question, James, or have I waffled too much?
Good question. Kelly, you can ask a question in a moment, but I've got him for a second, so I'm going to keep going.
Go for it.
In terms of, I forgot what.
Almost like we're professionals.
Well, yeah, no, almost.
Well, I'll tell you what, because I'll think of it in a minute. But while we're on the note of stories, we said this earlier, Kelly. What is the story of Only, and why is it actually tangibly translate into the way that this business works?
Yeah, I think if you're familiar with Only, you've heard this hundreds of times. But if you're not, you and I met at networking, James. We met at an in-person networking event, and we got married very quickly after that. Okay, so networking brought us a lot personally as well from a business perspective.
You sound really quite depressed when you say that. Series of information.
being serious, and that was 10 years ago, so amazing. But I think for us, networking, we could see very quickly in our own use of networking that we didn't just want it to be about work. We were going to spend a lot of time with these people. We were being vulnerable in front of these people. We trusted these people. We were spending more time with them than some of our family in some instances. So we wanted to be around the right people. So for us setting up Only, we wanted a family feel. We wanted to network with people that we liked. And our strapline became the network for people who like people. And we were nervous, weren't we? Because we thought, maybe people don't want to do that because they want to go out and they want to earn money. Not businessy enough. So I think we sat on our hands a little bit. I probably didn't, because I was probably waving. But we sat on our hands a little bit, and we thought, that sounds a bit too twee, that sounds a bit too woo-woo, people aren't going to like that. And the odd time we did say it, people loved it. And they said that it felt kind, it felt like their tribe, a place they wanted to be. And all that good stuff came as a result. So we massively embraced it, didn't we? And then we learnt to share our story about getting married in New York, and we networked during the wedding ceremony. We still work with the guy that married us. The bigger story there, of course, I'm not going to go into it now. We have a disabled daughter, and we've very recently started to allow some of that story to come in, because we personally set the business up so we could facilitate the care for Kennedy. We didn't drive the business with the story in order to get sympathy votes, to get people to come along and help build our business and our bank account so we could look after her. We did that because we needed a business where myself, James, and our other daughter, Kearney, could look after Kennedy, and we could be interchangeable. But now it's established, and now we're comfortable with it, and we want to allow that story to come in. We'll share elements of it where's needed. So I think it's taken us a long time to feel comfortable, but I definitely, and we talked about this before, Simon, we've done it the right way. We've built the business, we've established it, we've got it to where we want it to be, and now our story that we started at the beginning enhances that growth. Do you say so, Jane?
Yeah, because if we talk about, if I say to you, Only is a network where no one is excluded, right? That can feel like a throwaway kind of marketing line, can't it? But how can I back that up? It's why we're online only, even though some people would love it if we had an in-person component, because as soon as you do an in-person component, you exclude the people that can't get there because of their circumstances, because of their personality. They might be carers, they might have similarly, high needs people that are in their lives. So keep it online. You alienate some people, but then you're planting a flag to say, if you are one of those people, this is the network for you. So that's what we're getting at when we're saying it isn't just a a platitude? Because, you know, you see, what's it called, greenwashing, where people go, we want to save the planet, and then they don't actually do anything to really back it up, do they, Simon?
There are accusations. Daughter 2 works for Friends of the Earth, so she keeps me up to date with all the greenwashing accusations left, right, and centre, and pulls me up for casual racism, and sort of says, "Don't forget to turn the lights off," and all of that kind of jazz. But Kelly, you're absolutely right. You went for it, and then the story comes out. Now, the story might drive why you did it, but you didn't spam people with the "oh, woe is me" story to get them hooked before you started the stuff. And one of the reasons I also want to point out on a technical level why that strapline works is because the alliteration, the use of the word "people" twice. For people who like people. And if you take out the online networking stuff at the beginning, which pads it a little bit too much, and you just go only networking for people who like people. Can you see it's got that alliteration, and it's scansion. It's got for people who like people. You can see the rhythm and the pattern to it. And that's the kind of thing that sticks in people's minds, particularly when you're online and you're trying to hold their attention in difficult circumstances. And the difficult circumstances being that they've got attention demands on them left, right, and center. But that's one of the reasons, on a technical level, that's one of the reasons why the strapline works. We're
going to come on to that.
In the post.
I was going to say, well, check will arrive shortly.
We'll come on to that online specifics in a minute. But the question that I'd forgotten and I lost myself on was around feedback. Because you as a presentation coach and standing up on stage, you have to get feedback on what you're saying, isn't it? Because you were saying earlier that, you know, very few people can come up with a pithy statement straight away. How important is it to pay attention to the feedback of your audience? And is there kind of an online equivalent that you can use to build a better message?
Right. Depends on how you define audience. I'm going to be really, really, really brutal about it. And if we're talking in particular about, as if you'd expect me to do anything else. If you are talking about, let's say, an online presentation, what most people do, because they are nervous, is try and please everybody in the audience. Okay. And getting feedback from everybody is almost impossible because some will like it, some won't, and all of that kind of jazz. Whereas what professionals do is figure out what their call to action is going to be at the end. What is the change I want out of this event? Which people in my audience are most likely to be the ones who precipitate that? And what feedback am I getting from those people? Now, if that means you hack off 50% of your audience, that's fine, because they're just chair fillers. They are there just because if they don't turn up, they've actually got to go to their office and do some bloody work. They're just there for the free tea and biscuits. Oh, come on, you've met them. You know that there are people who just go because they're just there for the free tea and biscuits. So your audience in that instance is the CEO and perhaps the chief financial officer, because those are the people who are going to be making the decisions in the future. And feedback from them becomes critical. Whereas feedback from Joe Blogs I wouldn't listen to my mother-in-law telling me anything about how to make a better presentation because she knows nothing about making presentations. And it's also worth kind of holding in your head that what people will give you feedback on is the process that they see, which is different from the outcome that you wanted. Let me give you a really, really silly example. About 3 years ago, no more than that, I did a 3-month tour of Ireland. I went round every single university and research institute in the whole of Ireland. And I didn't see my wife for 3 months, except for one weekend when she came to meet me in Dublin. You can spot how our relationship works.
I was going to say, she had a great time.
Yeah, she didn't fly me home. No, she flew out to Dublin. This is before the tigerectomy. But in that presentation, I pretended that I had forgotten the page of a workbook I wanted people to look at.
Okay.
And they scrabbled around, and the first person to find it went, "It's on page 13." And everybody went, "Thanks very much." And they all, now that looked like I didn't know what I was doing, but I can promise you, after 100 hours of designing the damn workbook and 3 months of touring with it, I knew every It was there to get people to buy in more, because if they had looked for it and found it, they were more committed to filling in the content on page 13 than if I had just said, turn to page 3 at 13 and fill in the table.
That's genius. Yeah.
Wow.
But from the feedback that somebody gave me who was supposed to be appraising me, they sat at the back and went, "Well, that didn't look very professional, did it?" No, it didn't. But it was professional. It was carefully calibrated to be effective rather than just to look good. So I'm very, very careful about who you take feedback for, because they won't always understand exactly what it is that you are trying to do.
And they've probably got a bit of bias because it's something they want to be changed to benefit them. Probably.
Yeah, because they think that all presentations should be slick and smooth.
Yeah.
And the problem with slick and smooth presentations is that your audience risks becoming passive and they risk turning off. And at that point, you are just talking to the wall, not to people. Whereas if you have just enough raw edge, people engaged, it's like the other example that springs to mind is something called disfluency, which is okay. You will get people saying, remove all your disfluency. Turns out, if you do that, you sound like a robot and nobody trusts you. On the other hand, if every word is, it sounds like you don't know what you're doing. There is a goal. For the record, it's about 2.4%.
Wow.
There is research on it.
I bet there's an app that can track that as well.
PowerPoint will do it for you. There's a rehearsal mode in PowerPoint that will do it for you quite well. There are apps that will do it for you, of course, but even PowerPoint does it for you. But my point is that people will give you feedback if you go to Toastmasters and go, your count. They literally have people going, you had 32 ums. You have an count of 32. Great. Was that 2.4% of my words? Yes. Perfect. Which is different from what they expect me to do, which is, oh, thank you very much. I will try and remove all my ums.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. When we're thinking about the networking space, you're around peers that you should be able to trust, and you should be able to ask for that feedback from, and to a level you take that on board, like we're saying, depending on where they stand in that space. But also, whilst we're trying to add a lot of emotion into our businesses, not so much that it then affects the way we are able to deliver it and to be present in it. Because if you took the advice of everybody, you'd never get anything done and you'd never finish anything, would you? Because it's just everybody wants to chip in. So I think it's about knowing what your sweet spot is and not comparing yourself to everyone else.
Well, let's be utterly brutal about it. If you're using your networking tools and your marketing tools online to sell, there is only one metric that matters. And it is not how many people liked what you said and how good they thought your presentation was and all of that kind of jazz. It is how many people come to you and go, please, can I buy?
Yeah.
Everything else is a means to an end, not a, it doesn't have to be literally, please, can I buy? But you get the
interest.
Idea. They come to you and have some kind of meaningful engage at the end of the day.
I suppose that's sort of what I'm thinking about in terms of feedback, that where I'm seeing a lot of people that post online, talk at networking, it's either generic or they don't really know their audience well enough and they think the solution is just keep saying it over and over. Isn't it better to get into conversations with people to say, okay, I think people get sucked into that. Wasn't it Steve Jobs that said words to the effect of that the audience doesn't know what it wants? I show them what they want and make it aspirational.
It's not the customer's job to know what he or she wants.
Yeah, and I think that's slightly misleading, isn't it? And if you are a visionary like Steve Jobs, you can be that way. But if you're selling business services, isn't it better to ask questions and build a profile of what are your real pain points? What frustrates you? Because what I can extrapolate sat at my desk about, because it's basically me guessing what you might want to buy from me. Isn't it better if I ask you and build that picture?
Yeah. and I've been quite Machiavellian about it on occasion in some of the networking meetings I've been into with you guys, because what I haven't done is say to everybody, hello, my name's Dr. Simon Raybould. I'm a presentation skills trainer and a professional speaker, and I do this. I have given people just enough information to tweak their curiosity. And if I get it really, oh, this is so Machiavellian. If I get it really, really right, one of you two as the hosts will ask me a follow-up question.
We know your game now. Which, if I'm thinking back,
that's not me telling my audience stuff. That is you as hosts who they trust asking me stuff about me, so it becomes more conversational rather than me being a performer.
Okay.
It is really Machiavellian, and I only a complete bastard could do that and sleep at night. Honestly, no problem with that whatsoever. But to your point, James, about people just talking until they've got the message over, if what you're doing ain't working, do something different.
Yeah.
Well, can I?
Sorry,
Simon, carry on. I batted in there.
Well, if you're talking to somebody who doesn't speak your language, try a different language. Don't speak English louder. Don't do more of the same. Hello, do you have any bread? I mean, if they don't speak English, then loud English doesn't work. Do something different, for the love of God. And if you have to, experiment, make a fool of yourself. And the advice I always give people when you are starting out with the whole networking thing, and it's so easy to do with you guys online, do not network where it matters, at least when you start out. Because if let's say I'm a baker and I go to my home region, the kind of Newcastle, and I screw up my networking, I've burnt my bridges. Whereas if I go to Southampton and I screw up my networking, nobody in Southampton was ever going to come to Newcastle upon Tyne to buy a loaf of bread anyway. So I've not lost anything.
Yeah, so that's that practice piece. Yeah, for sure.
Where it doesn't matter. Whereas what people do is go, I want to practice where my friends are for moral support. Well,
and then it doesn't work.
Then, if it doesn't work there, two things go wrong. The first is you've burnt your bridges with your local clients, assuming you're a local audience. And secondly, you've then got to live with the shame of having crashed and burned in front of your friends. Whereas what professionals do is crash and burn in front of complete strangers that they're never going to see ever again. And it's less of a...
it's easier to move on from, isn't it? I was just looking at Callum's. Maybe you could look at that, James. You're talking about the stories. So what thoughts have you got on people that change their story all the time, Simon? Because I think people do that because they think, oh, that one didn't work, so I'll add another one in. Or, oh, no, I'm doing this now, so I'll add this bit in. What's your thoughts on that?
So we have two definitions of story at that point. There's the big overarching story of why you founded ONLE and that kind of jazz, versus the much more tactical story of how the tactical version story, how you explain it. Okay. Now, if you're changing the big overview, I look at you and go, fraud, because you can't be an expert in webs one day and storytelling the next. It takes a while to develop experience and expertise. Yeah. But if you are changing the way you deliver, that's not automatically a bad thing. If you're changing the tactical story, it's not automatically a bad thing. It can be if you're changing it all the time. And there is some research about how often you should be changing the way you deliver your message, because if you deliver your message all the time, it becomes background noise. And people,
who's actually listening?
Yeah.
I think that plays into this, doesn't it?
It's got to be genuine, isn't it? I mean, if it's a pivot based on, do you know what, I've been speaking to people in the market and what my skill set actually means I can provide X, I think that will work all day long. I think it's like when you're saying, Simon, you've met someone one week who was an accountant, and then next week they're a life coach, and you go, okay, what's happened there then?
I do want to... They've had a crisis, yeah. They probably used a life coach. I do want to make a bit more of Callum's point there, because he won't mind me saying this. Secretly, I was thinking of Callum when I sort of asked this question. But I don't think you can change what you do, but you can't change your fundamental story, can you? So what I know about Callum, I don't know Callum from his past businesses. I know him from a couple. But Callum is still Callum in both of those spaces.
Yeah,
I'm still buying Callum, you know, and the stories that come with it enhance my knowledge of Callum. So I do believe that you can pivot and you can change business, and you can do that well, because you should be telling your core story, which would come along with those businesses and those transitions anyway.
Yeah. So the jargon here would be, don't change your core story, but you can change your narrative about how you. Yeah. So the more tactical the story, crudely speaking, the more often you can get away with changing it.
Brilliant.
So, for example, you will have heard me use a joke in networking meetings for a month now, which says, I come from as far north as you can get and still be in civilization. I come to the point where even the Romans built a wall and went, stone no further. We don't want the rest of it. Right? And it gets a laugh and it breaks the ice and stuff. But everybody has heard it twice now. Okay. Which means that the next time I introduce myself, I will find a different. It'll still be facetious. It'll still be me.
Good.
It'll still be tongue in cheek. It'll still be somewhat sarcastic, but it will be a different way of doing that. Don't know what it is yet. I haven't a clue.
You make it look so natural. So here's me thinking, blimey, he's a quick-witted chap, isn't he? But you kind of think about this stuff, and this does play into that point of
quick-witted and good-looking. We'll just lay that out.
Of course, all of the above. But we talk about this in our training, and we were talking about this in a session yesterday. If you just rock up and you do it off the fly, you're going to cock it up. You might get away with it once or twice, but again, it's that not burning your bridges probably sounds a bit too harsh, but people will stop wanting to listen to you because you're not respecting them enough to actually put the effort in, as simple as it may seem, to make that a nice experience.
And then you get people at the opposite end of the spectrum. My name is Simon Raybould, and I am based in Newcastle upon Tyne, and it doesn't matter how good what you're reading out is. Yeah. If it is if it sounds like a rehearsed, recited thing, and we've both seen this, where it doesn't matter even if it's just genuinely funny. If it's done over and over and it comes from a page. And worse still, if people can see that you're looking down at the page, there's a bit of me that goes, oh, bless.
Yeah.
Just look at the effing camera.
There's a point there, isn't there, about the fact that the people that do it well look like you said, Kelly, look like they're just doing it off the top of the head, but they're not reading a script, but they've prepared in their mind. They know what they're going to say. That's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah. We talk about rehearsing till you can't get it wrong.
Yeah,
and
I got to a point in networking where I was helping people with Twitter. That was one of the things back then that I was offering as a service. I'll teach you Twitter, and I just used to say, "Hi, I'm James. I can help you get your head around and get your audience on Twitter." But here comes tweet of the week, and I used to just literally have researched, found a funny tweet, read it out, because I told them that they could work with me if they wanted to help, but it was left with the bit that, oh, here comes James's tweet. I wonder if it's funny this week. And it's that same mechanic.
It's exactly what I was talking about earlier on. It's not the affective model. It's what we call the tactical model. It's tell them what they need to learn and then give them the emotional stuff that brings it to life. In your case, the funny tweet of the week. So they kind of, that would be interesting. Oh, yeah, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
And it's, although you were kind of making it up on the spur of the moment, you weren't really, because you've got a format, you've got a formula, and all you were doing was changing the words within that formula. So it looked like improv.
And someone else's joke as well. It's even better. Jeremy Clarkson was good for this. He was one of my go-to people because he said things that were very un-PC. We need to think about wrapping up in a minute, believe it or not. So we need to talk to you about your book. I just want to ask you for a tip. We do have to talk about your book. Don't roll your eyes.
I'm just laughing at my inability to do marketing. I'd completely forgotten about the damn book.
Any tips for Zoom calls, engaging people, stopping them drifting? Because it's really difficult, isn't it? But it's a fundamental part of building relationships online. You got any tips?
Are you talking about presentations or are you talking about networking?
I'm actually talking more about having one-to-one. So yeah, networking.
Okay.
But you can do both if you can cover it quickly.
The one-to-one networking stuff is the same as everybody always says. Try and listen more than you talk, and avoid the god-awful situation where you're sitting there thinking, that's not that's quite an interesting thing they're telling me, but in a moment I'm going to tell them exactly the same thing, which will be much more interesting because it's about me. It's all about questions and taking it further. And if you can't think of a question to ask, here's a really dirty trick that I picked up from Chris Voss. Chris Voss used to be the chief hostage negotiator for the FBI, so he knows his way around stuff. Just repeat the last few words that somebody said, and then hold the silence, and that will encourage them to go deeper into what they have just said. So even if you haven't been listening, all you have to do is remember the last thing they said and go, oh, so only on Thursdays? And then start to going, yeah, well, on Mondays I do so and so, and Tuesdays I do such and such, and Wednesdays I'm on so and so, and Friday I take off. So yeah, that's fascinating. And it's a really
you can do that. You can do that because I love Chris Voss. I think he's brilliant. But to see the examples he gives in that space, you can string that on for hours. You literally can, because people will just go on and on and on. So that is actually a really good. We might have to remember that one, James, for the training. But that is a really good point. Yeah.
For the training, Kelly.
For the training we do for people on how to network.
Oh.
Yeah. How to network? What do you mean? Yeah, exactly right. It can just go and go and go. The problem there is you end up with 2-hour conversations when you really wanted it to stop on the first conversation. Yeah.
And the other tip I've got always is always have your phone beside you, so that if you tap it, it can accidentally ring and go, oh, I'm sorry, this is an emergency call. I've got to take this.
You're giving away too many secrets now. We know your game. The book.
Come on then, tell us about your book, please.
The book, Story Making. It's due to launch.
Oh, this old thing.
I've forgotten how many it is now. November the 20th is the date that's in mind for the launch. It's somebody has called it is never leave home without it hands-on guide. They called it, for how to be a better storyteller and communicator. So it is a tactical guide for use this kind of story under these circumstances to do this, because I got so pissed off with people just saying, tell stories, like some kind of demented, hang on, like some kind of demented parrot, that I started to read the research about whether storytelling works and how storytelling works and all of that kind of jazz. And it turns out that just telling stories does not work. You need to tell certain kinds of stories under certain conditions in certain ways. And it's about that. It is, I described it as forensic. Other people have described it as tactical. It's pretty lighthearted, but the whole point is it is designed to be an incisive kind of surgical way of using stories as a resource rather than just as entertainment.
And I guess you've pulled together a lot of different messages from other spaces and brought that in. So it's a comprehensive place to be. So yeah, sounds good.
There's more research went into this than went into my PhD.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure that's literally true, but it certainly feels like it.
Wow. Is there a sign up link for this? Is there somewhere we can get this?
If you can't. No, you can't order it in advance because it's a paperback, and Amazon doesn't take advanced orders for paperbacks. So the only way people can do that is drop me a line, or if they go to storymaking.business/book, there's a link a calendar link there that they can put into their. Oh, hello, Jennifer. There's a calendar link there that they can put into their diaries. I think Jennifer's just put in there. She saw one of the chapters, I think, very early on in the process.
Yeah, that's good. And if that is coming from Jennifer, that's high praise indeed. So yeah, thank you.
The chapter that Jennifer saw She saw what's become half of 8 chapters now, and that half chapter that Jennifer saw was based upon the workshop I did for the Professional Speaking Association last year.
Okay.
There is a hysterical video of me getting a standing ovation at the end of a workshop. You kind of, standing ovations on stage you can get with, but standing ovations at the end of a workshop kind of take you by surprise. And this hysterical moment of me just looking at the audience going, oh shit, what do I do now? Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Didn't realise your own genius. There
And
we
then,
go.
like a true networking professional, I went and hid in the toilets for 20 minutes until the crowd had gone away. Because there were literally people coming saying, I want to work with you. What's your day rate? And I said, find me on this afternoon. I'll just go and hide in the toilet for 20 minutes until.
We got him here for presentation stuff, not for networking. Simon, thank you so much. We do have to wrap up.
Yeah.
That's been a very rapid hour, actually.
Very quickly.
So thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you again next month.
So have fun, everybody.